of why an understanding and experience in foreign policy and national security is so critical. Trump's actions in taking out this high-ranking Iranian general was an act of war. He has pushed our country directly into a state of war that will very likely, if it continues to escalate, will end up being far more costly, far more devastating, both in lives, American lives, and the lives of people across the region in the Middle East, and far more costly in taxpayer dollars than anything that we have seen in the wars waged in Iraq, in Syria, and in Afghanistan. We need to be very clear-eyed about the consequences of these decisions that have been made, both those made in the last few days, but also the decisions that this administration and Trump has made that have brought us to this point. What we've seen materialize over the last few days didn't just come up out of nowhere. It didn't come up out of nowhere. But every one of these actions, beginning with Trump's withdrawal from the Iran nuclear agreement, further escalating tensions, further escalating sanctions, which is a modern-day siege, tactic of warfare against Iran. It's hurting the Iranian people more than anything else. Designating Iran's military as a terrorist organization, something that is unprecedented in history in the world. Deploying thousands and thousands more US troops to the region, to Saudi Arabia. Each of these actions like laying a new stick of dynamite that's brought us to this point of being at war with Iran. We have to understand what has happened within the context of these events that have occurred over the last, year or so. And now the new headline today that broke, saying that the United States has ceased operations in Iraq against ISIS. Why? Because our troops there in Iraq are now having to get into a defensive position against Iranian forces or Iranian militias because of what has occurred. So the very authorization that Congress passed in the wake of 9/11, the congressionally approved authorization to use military force to go against, to defeat and destroy Al-Qaeda and their affiliated terrorist organizations, is why our troops are in Iraq, to prevent a resurgence of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And yet, because of Trump's actions, they are no longer fulfilling that mission. They've announced that that mission has ceased, and they are instead redirecting their efforts towards Iran. These actions are making us less safe. Doesn't matter how many times Pompeo gets up on television and says, we are more safe because of Trump's actions. With 100% certainty, he says, we are more safe. Yet what's actually happening on the ground is the exact opposite. We're seeing how ISIS and Al-Qaeda will be strengthened because of the decisions of this administration. Foreign policy is domestic policy. I'm the only candidate running for president that has deployed to Iraq. I've been serving now in the Army National Guard for nearly 17 years. I first deployed, my first deployment was to Iraq during the height of the war in 2005. We were taking heavy casualties as Americans, every day experiencing that terribly high human cost of war. I understand very clearly what is happening in Iraq and Syria and the different dynamics and the complexities that are going on there. Bringing that experience of my 2 deployments to the Middle East, that experience that I've gained in Congress now for 7 years, focused on national security and foreign policy, serving on the Armed Services Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Homeland Security Committee. I'm prepared to walk in on day one to fulfill that responsibility as Commander-in-Chief, where I will take action specific to Iran to pursue diplomacy instead of war. Iran has announced today that they are taking another step forward in developing nuclear weapons capacity, breaking away in a pretty critical way from the Iran nuclear agreement that Trump withdrew from, putting us in the place and the world in the place where every day that this agreement is thrown to the wayside, that Iran is one day closer to developing nuclear weapons capacity, increasing this threat. If I were president today, I would do what was necessary to get this Iran nuclear deal back together, to bring Iran back into compliance, to drop the ever-escalating sanctions, this modern-day siege, and walk us back away from the brink of yet another endless war, this time with Iran. What does this cost look like? Because this is going to be connected to every other issue and concern that we'll discuss here tonight. Let's look at Afghanistan. Right now in Afghanistan, we're spending $4 billion a month. $4 billion every month, just in Afghanistan. I'm not talking about Iraq or Syria or Saudi Arabia or any other country in the Middle East. That comes out to $5.5 million per hour. This is coming out of our pockets, out of our communities, out of our schools, out of our ability to actually serve the needs of our people here at home. Every single one of us, whether you realize it or not, whether you feel it or not, we are all paying the price for war, which is why it is so necessary that we have a commander-in-chief who knows what they're doing. As your present commander-in-chief, I will end these long-standing regime change wars. Work to pursue diplomacy. Lead with a foreign policy based on cooperation rather than conflict. Recognizing that, yes, we need a strong and ready military capable of protecting and defending the security of the American people, but not misusing and dishonoring our military by sending them on missions that are truly unworthy of the great sacrifice that they are making. I'll work to de-escalate tensions between the United States and other nuclear-armed countries. Work to end this new Cold War and nuclear arms race that we are in, as this administration has torn up treaties and put more money towards building more nuclear weapons that make us and the world less safe, and instead redirect our taxpayer dollars towards actually serving the needs of our people right here at home. Things like better education for our kids. Things like making sure that every single American has clean water to drink. It should be a given, right? In the United States of America, the wealthiest nation in the world, but it's not. It's not. Right here in New Hampshire, we have this huge PFAS problem where people are being poisoned by the water that's coming out of your faucets. This is happening in many different communities across the country, different toxins and poisons. And every time people come up, and I've met with these water warriors, these incredible people in Merrimack who are fighting for their community, and what they're told is, you know what, there's just not enough money to clean up these chemicals out of your water. There's not enough money, not enough money. And yet, in the blink of an eye, as we've seen in the last few days, politicians across Washington have no qualms about starting another war that is actually undermining our safety and security. Starting another war to which they cannot say what the goal is. What's the objective? What are we actually trying to accomplish? Foreign policy is domestic policy. All of these issues are directly connected. As we look to how we pay for things, how we get things done, this goes to the second point that I want to make here, which is just the partisan gridlock that we have in Washington. that rather than actually focusing on solving problems, passing legislation that best serves the people in our country, we end up with one party fighting against the other, and election after election after election, rather than seeing, all right, how can we collaborate? How can we work together? How can we just sit down, close the doors, and work out our differences on many of these different issues? Instead, what we see is one party and the other trying to exact as much harm or punishment against the other party in order to win more seats. So the decisions that are being made about bills that are coming to the House floor are not being made to meet and address the needs of the American people, but are instead based on a pure political calculation. Depends on which party is in power and how those decisions are made. This is what is at the heart of what we, the American people, can and must change. And changing the expectations that we have of our leaders, regaining the power of our own voices, regaining the power that we have in our votes to remind those who we vote for that you work for us. You work for the people, and we have the power to hire or fire based on how well you are doing your job of service. And that's the vision that our founders had for us. That we would be a country led by those whose sole purpose and mission was one of service. A government of, by, and for the people. Not a government of, by, and for big pharma, of, by, and for big insurance, of, by, and for Amazon or GM or any of these big corporations who get away with paying no taxes whatsoever. No, a government of, by, and for the people. The pay-to-play culture that we have in Washington must be disrupted and gotten rid of. Because as we look at things like healthcare or the business of war and the military-industrial complex and the very well-paid consultants and those who profit off of these unnecessary, wasteful wars, as we look at education, we look at the environment, we can look at almost every single part of our government, and we can see how so many of the policies that have been made and passed and rules passed within the government are not done to protect us or to serve us, are not done with really thinking, okay, what's in the best interest of people? Instead, they are made with the calculus of, you know, which high-paid lobbyist is in the room as these policies are being written, and getting input coming from all these different directions of people representing the powerful elite who benefit the most, to the detriment of the rest of us. A government of, by, and for the people. How do we accomplish this? We do this by coming together as Americans, recognizing that whether we are Democrats or Republicans or independents or libertarians, that at our core and at our base, we are all Americans. And we stand strong when we stand united upon the foundation of our Constitution and the vision that our founders had for this country, that actually not only allowed for, but encouraged vigorous debate, encouraged us to join together in the town square and to bring our ideas to the forefront. Say, hey, here's why I think my ideas are better. You can share why your ideas are better, and share these perspectives that actually help us learn and create some empathy and say, okay, hey, I didn't really think of that before. None of us is always going to get everything that we want, but by coming together, bridging these divides that are tearing our country apart, we can begin this process of healing our terribly divided nation. We can do that. We must do that. Abraham Lincoln gave a speech a little over 161 years ago where he warned that a house divided against itself cannot stand. Those words spoke loud and clear when he delivered that speech, as they do for us today. And at the end of that speech, he said, "We shall not fail. If we stand fast, we shall not fail." And that we he was talking about was us, we the people. So as we go forward in these elections, as you consider this important decision that you have before you, the obstacles are great towards making this change we need to see. The battles will be tough. But as we've seen throughout our country's history, the only time that big change has been made was when we, the people, stood up. We stood together for each other, for our country, for our home, and for our future. That's why I'm here today. I think that's why you're here, because you care. And for that, I'm grateful. And for that, I am hopeful. Even in spite of all of the challenges, I am hopeful. Because we're going to make it happen. We're going to make it happen. So we've got a couple of microphones running around here. We'll open it up to start this conversation. And as you think about the question or comment that you may want to make, I'd love for you to, as we're beginning this new year, to maybe share something that you are hopeful for, or share something that you want to see, a positive change that you want to see for our country. I saw one hand over here first. I'll come to you in a little bit. Yes, ma'am, we'll start with you.
Actually, I have two questions. Let's see.
Can we start with your name?
Carol Edwards.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol.
I tend to be conservative. Can you hear me?
Can we get the sound up on her mic?
Okay. But I have friends who lean to the left, and I like the fact that we're friends. So
that's good. That's exactly what we're talking about.
That's one thing I'm hopeful about. So my two questions are, what was it that made you go into the military? And also, how do you think you might be the one that could help bridge the divide between Republicans and Democrats?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carol. Your example is exactly right. So I'm going to start with your second question first, because it really just starts with being friends, treating each other with respect, which then allows us to have a real dialogue. Find where those areas that we can agree. Also discover some areas where it's like, hey, sorry, can't be with you on that. Where you can disagree without being disagreeable, that you can disagree without it turning into, I hate you, you are evil, which is where we are too often today. That's the problem in this whole cancel culture, that if you are not perfectly on my side in every single possible way, then I'm turning my back on you. And this is really what is driving these divides, and it's happening because of political affiliations or ideas or positions, religion, race, ethnicity, orientation, all of these different things that are being used as wedges to tear us apart. So how do we get through that? It starts with just treating each other with respect. This is something that when I was first elected in 2012 to Congress, in a very practical way, and I think that gets the heart of your question. Okay, we can talk about all these things, but in a practical way, how do you bridge this divide, especially in Washington, to actually get things done? And I knew when I got elected, I was walking into a very partisan environment. I was told by some friends of mine who'd lived and worked in Washington for a long time, who'd worked in the White House under a Democratic president, that just said, look, this is the way it is here. You're a Democrat, a freshman, newly elected, coming into a Congress and the House of Representatives controlled by Republicans, and so you're not going to be able to pass legislation. Just know that going in. It's not going to happen. So they said, you know, the best thing that you can think about doing to serve your constituents is go give speeches on the House floor. Try to get, a platform to be able to raise attention to the issues that you really care about. And then maybe eventually when the Democrats take over the House, then you can start thinking about actually passing bills. I didn't like that advice. That was unacceptable to me. That's not why I ran for Congress, just to sit around and think about how I can give a speech. Went there to actually do things. And so I began with thinking, how do I reach across? How do I begin to make friends and develop relationships with my colleagues across the aisle? I called my mother in Hawaii, and I asked her if she would make 434 boxes of her famously delicious macadamia nut toffee for every one of my soon-to-be friends and colleagues. She said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. I asked her for one more favor, if she would make another 435 larger boxes of her toffee for the staff of every member of Congress. I worked for a U.S. Senator from Hawaii between both of my deployments for a few years in Washington, where he was the chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee. I was a legislative aide, and I know how things work. She paused only for a few minutes. She's like, okay, it's going to take a little bit longer, but this is important. So she's in Hawaii. She's starting to make her toffee. She's chopping the macadamia nuts. She's stirring 2 pots at the same time. My dad was supervising and taking one piece out of every single pan that she poured just to make sure it was good. And as they were doing that, I was in DC just starting to handwrite personal notes to every one of my new colleagues, going online, learning more about them, where are they from, what's their background and experience, and then just signing every one of these notes saying, I look forward to serving with you. We started to deliver these gifts of aloha and very quickly started getting response. Having conversations with members in the hallway or on the House floor, Republicans, people from other parts of the country that normally I would not have the opportunity to interact with, chairmen of powerful committees. They're just coming and saying, thank you, Tulsi, that was really nice. Many of them saying, I ate all the candy and I need more before I can go home this weekend to bring some for my family. But then most importantly, saying, what issues are your constituents most concerned about? And what are your priorities here? What do you want to work on? Saying, I'm the chair of this committee, or here's an issue I've been working on for a long time. Let's find a way to work together. One simple, small gesture of reaching out with what we in Hawaii call aloha, which really means respect and love and care. No preconditions, no purity test, no pre-screening, reaching out with respect. And that built really a strong foundation for relationships and friendships that enabled me to do my job, to serve, to pass legislation. I passed my first bill that I introduced as a member of Congress into law within my first year of being there. Something they said couldn't be done. And amendments to important bills, things that when I introduced them, I was told by everybody who knew anything that Republicans have opposed these things for so long, don't even try, it'll be dead on arrival. But when my amendment went to the floor for a vote, it was one specifically related to education, instead of everybody just towing the line and walking in lockstep because the leadership said oppose the Gabbard amendment, I started getting people returning my phone calls, texting me back, stopping me in the halls and saying, hey, they're telling us to vote against your amendment. Tell me why I should vote for it. Having that opening to make my case based on the substance of my legislation. And having the respect and the relationship, the trust built up where they knew I was going to tell them the truth. That I wasn't going to try to lie or cheat or try to manipulate them into doing something that might end up screwing them over. I didn't convince every single one of them, but I was able to make my case to enough who said, yeah, that makes sense. I'm with you. This kind of respect is something that we cannot take for granted. And it's something that as president, I will bring immediately to invite leaders from the House and Senate to the White House to begin this same kind of conversation, away from all the cameras and the lights and the tweets and everything else, just to start to reestablish these relationships. As it is now, every time congressional leaders are invited to the White House, it makes headlines in Washington because it almost never happens, which has always kind of made me scratch my head and wonder, how do you work with somebody if you never talk to them? Congress and the executive branch are co-equal branches of government. You have to work together. If you're the president, you got to work with Congress to get legislation passed. We cannot continue this trend of abuse of executive authority because the president doesn't want to work with Congress or Congress isn't doing what they want. You got to be able to work together. Congress has to be able to work with the executive. This is the way that our country and our governance has been set up. That requires conversation. That requires treating each other with respect. Even if it means you have a fierce debate and disagreement in a certain area. I'm not talking about laying over and just saying, all right, take the store. No. Each of us, we have strongly held beliefs and principles and ideas that we really care about. It's not about letting those go. It's about being able to come together and know that even with some of those disagreements in our core, we are coming from the same place. We are fellow Americans, and we love our country, and we care very much about our families, our communities. And if that's where we're coming from, then I know that we can and we will make progress together and heal these divides for each other, for our country. Your first question. I joined the military, like so many Americans, motivated by the attacks on 9/11 to do all that I could to defeat the evil that visited us on that day, which is yet another reason why the actions that this administration has taken that are strengthening the very same terrorist groups that attacked us on 9/11 is so deeply offensive. And it's a betrayal. Ultimately, it is a betrayal to all of us. To all of us. Rather than staying focused on our national security interests, the decisions this administration has taken, both in the last few days and previously, is actually further strengthening terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda when we should be focusing our resources on defeating them. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Liz. I only have one question. Will you support conditioning aid to Israel on ending Israel's abuse and imprisonment of Palestinian children? And there's a bill in the House, H.R. 2407, supported by Betty McCollum.
Thank you, Liz, for your question. I will read Betty's bill. I have not done so yet, so I will definitely take a look at that bill. But more broadly, I have been outspoken as a member of Congress in speaking out against some of the wrong actions that Israel has taken, particularly as it relates to the illegal occupation and continued taking of more territory away from the Palestinian people. I think that the decisions not only made by Bibi Netanyahu, but also those made by Trump as it relates to Israel and Palestine have unfortunately caused more hardship for the Palestinian people and the Israeli people because it's further derailed any hopes of a peace process from moving forward. So as president, I would look at all of the tools that we have towards this complex situation to see how we can best bring this peace process back on track that ultimately must result in leaders and the people of both countries determining a negotiated outcome where both of them can live in peace and security in their own homes.
thank you for being here. I've been following you for about 6 months. And,
What's your name, sir?
Oh, Steve Lornitzo. I
right.
live in Lime Center.
All right.
And I'm actually from Madison, Wisconsin, but I lived in New England since 1980 or so. And I served in the military.
What branch of service?
Initially, I was in the Air Force. I was stationed at the Air Force Academy.
Okay.
And then I got out for a while, got my college degree, and I joined the National Guard in Vermont. And it's just over there.
Down the road?
And
you were in the Air Guard?
No, I switched in the Army.
Okay.
MDC, Seaburn. Can't be really
Fort Leonard
necessary.
Wood?
Yes, been there. So I appreciate one of the things that I know you're interested in is the environment.
Yes.
And that was the initial reason for you to get into politics.
Yeah.
And, but for me, my biggest heartburn is over, and you mentioned going after the 9/11 situation, investigating, you mentioned the Saudis, but there are others involved. And I would really like to know if you're going to pursue that.
Yeah. Thank you. This is, there's a lawsuit, actually, maybe a few lawsuits, but one in particular that I've been made aware of coming from both the family members of those who were killed on 9/11, as well as people who survived, both first responders and people who were in the building or in the area who survived that attack. And that lawsuit is against our government to get information, to get the details, because there has been ongoing investigations after investigations after investigations to detail the specific individuals and people and personalities who provided support to the hijackers who flew those planes into the buildings and who launched those attacks on 9/11. But that information has been barred from being released to us, the American people, as well as these family members who are still seeking closure and seeking justice. Now, they're trying through all means necessary to get this information. They have been promised that they would get this information from this administration and from previous ones as well. But every single time they are on the cusp of a release of unredacted documents, they either get documents that are so completely blacked out that they make no sense whatsoever, or the key information necessary is blocked out. And so they're not able to move forward really with justice. A few years ago, Congress passed legislation. The acronym was JASTA. I don't remember exactly what that spells out right now, but basically it empowered these family members to be able to sue Saudi Arabia for their role in this attack on 9/11. But that lawsuit can't go forward unless they actually have the evidence and the information that exists within the Department of Justice and the FBI right now. So I'm standing with them and supporting them and continuing to seek release of this information from our own government, both for them, but also for the American people in our own national security interests. And I will continue to push forward and to stand with them, to stand with the American people in getting that information and releasing it, declassifying it and releasing it to the American people. We all deserve to know the truth, and justice deserves to be served. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm Anya. I have two questions. The first is I have been looking at the polls, and it does not seem likely that you are going to win the Democratic nomination, and definitely not the Republican. And
I agree with that part.
yeah. And especially with the assassination of General Soleimani, I think that it would be a good thing to have in the debates a non-interventionist voice. And and looking at the polls, would you be willing to think about running for president as a independent? In second place, I cannot vote for you, but I would like to help. If I show up tomorrow at your event in Field something.
Where is our event tomorrow? Hanfield.
In Enfield, can I help set up, clean up, work at the merchandise table? Can I volunteer?
Thank you so much. Come here, come here, come here. This is our future, guys. Just wave. Can you wave to everybody? Say hi. She is why I have hope. Right? Thank you very much, Anya. Thank you very much for both of your questions. You can sit down if you want. Do you want to stand up here? It's up to you. Thank you very much for both of your questions, Anya. It's great to see you. To your second question, I would be so honored to have your help. You're right. Unfortunately, I wish you could vote for me right now, but they won't let you. But there's a lot of ways that you could still help. Just by being here, by sharing your voice with people here and with people everywhere you go. And yes, we would love to have your help at tomorrow's event. And you can help welcome everybody. And I believe that you alone could convince every single person to vote for me. Yeah. Yeah. To your first question, no, I will not be running as an independent or any other third-party candidate. I'm running for the Democratic nomination. And you mentioned polling. All the polls in 2016 said Trump would lose. So I would encourage you to, as you look at the polls, they all say different things, but take them with a barrel of salt. Because no matter what the polls say, and this is what I love so much, especially about New Hampshire and New Hampshire voters, is you know the responsibility that you have as first in the nation, not only with the individual vote that you have, but the message that you will send to the country. And what I love is how independent-minded New Hampshire voters are, that you don't listen to the polls or what the headlines are saying to dictate to you who can or cannot win the Democratic nomination, the pundits who've been proven to be wrong more often than they've been right. Instead, you follow your conscience and you vote according to what you believe is in the best interest of our country. So don't look at the polls. They don't mean a whole lot. What really matters most is getting people out on election day and making sure that we have those votes to be able to win. And that you can help with, Anya. Good? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Roman Menezes. I'm a Dartmouth student. I also have two questions, maybe less informed than Anya over there. But my first question relates to the environment. In my opinion, climate change is the biggest threat the world has ever faced, and it relates to so many of our world's problems. So I wanted to know if you have a specific plan for combating with that, as well as your stance on the Green New Deal and how you would implement that. Given it's a little bit hard to do, you require a lot of mobilization. My second question, given we're in the premises of a very privileged educational institution, and given we're in an age of misinformation and a lot of branding of the news and dissemination of false information, what do you think is the role of educational institutions today in promoting an informed electorate, and what you would consider, what you would do to promote that role? Thank you.
How do you say your name again? Rohan. Thank you very much, Rohan. Thanks for both of your questions. Both are incredibly, incredibly important. As you're Steve, right? As Steve said, I first got involved in politics back in Hawaii as a teenager, and then later running for office when I was 21 because of environmental issues. And my concern even back then, before climate change was a thing, before people were really looking seriously at the generational impact, the way we live our lives as people around the world was having on the environment. Just coming from a place of, look, I love my home. You know, I grew up surfing, hiking, and the outdoors is my playground, and I wanted to make sure that we protected that. I wanted to make sure that we protected clean water for our people in our communities in Hawaii. And this commitment to protecting our environment has continued throughout my life, as well as now in Congress. There are very specific areas of action that we need to take here at home, as well as specific actions that we need to take as a member of the global community to address these serious threats and the global crisis that we have before us. There are a couple of main areas that I think we need to deal with. Obviously, dealing with the outdated form of energy, fossil fuels, that we have and the impact that that has on our environment in a number of ways. I was at Standing Rock a few years ago where so many people from across the country came together to this reservation to stand as water protectors with people whose water source, not only for them and their community of Standing Rock in North Dakota, was being threatened, but the water source that was threatening 4 states in that surrounding area. Thousands of people came protesting against the building of this oil pipeline directly beneath this water source, knowing that eventually pipelines leak. It was an incredible thing to be there for and to be a part of, just to see this level of awareness and people from across party lines standing and saying, water is life. Water is life. And that movement, I think, has continued to grow. I've met so many people who've been inspired, who were there or who heard about it, to say, gosh, there's so much more that we can and must do to make this transition off of our dependence and addiction to fossil fuels, the energy of yesterday, and really invest in a clean, renewable energy future. Build a clean, renewable energy economy. Throw away this false choice that we as voters are often given when we are told, well, you have to choose between either protecting our environment or having a good paying job and a strong economy, because you can't have both, which is absolutely ridiculous. We can and must, as we look towards a good paying jobs, as we look towards a sustainable economy, as we look towards the investments we need to make in sustainable infrastructure, we have to be able to do both, and we can. We need to transition the nearly $30 billion we are still paying as taxpayers to subsidize the fossil fuel industry that needs no subsidies at all, and instead redirect those resources towards encouraging more innovation and investment in technology. We have solar and wind are probably the 2 most well-known forms of clean renewable energy, but there's a lot more. There's a lot more that innovation and entrepreneurs are bringing to the forefront every day. The second major area is in agriculture. This is one that doesn't get as much attention as fossil fuels, but really many would say has an even greater outsized negative impact on our environment and on the carbon outputs that we have in the world. Every 5 years, Congress passes a farm bill. It's a big, huge bill that's very expensive, and it is still, unfortunately, supporting and promoting and incentivizing farming practices that are ruining soil quality, that are poisoning our water, and having a negative impact on our environment. We need to shift away from that and instead say, okay, let's make sure that our farm bill is promoting local and regional farmers. Instead of subsidizing companies like Monsanto, let's look and see how we can support people who are using regenerative farming practices, who are focusing on growing food to feed people in their local communities, rather than solely looking at how much we can export to other countries and import. shifting our attention in agriculture, I think, will have a serious positive impact as we look at dealing with the environmental threats that we face. And the last one I kind of mentioned is about foreign policy. Of course, as president, one of the first things I'll do is re-enter the Paris Climate Accords. But we all should be clear-eyed about how we should all be clear-eyed about the reality that even those who were signatories of it originally said this doesn't even come close to doing what must be done at a global scale. So it is an important first step that will allow us to then take the next step and take the next step, building these alliances and coalitions with other countries that's necessary to make the kind of global impact that we have. And it's not easy, especially in this climate. We've got escalating tensions between the US and China right now with this administration's policies, escalating tensions between the US and Russia, tensions with other countries that are unfortunately making it harder for us to be able to sit down across from each other, diplomatically work out a lot of the differences we have, while also being able to say, well, we have these differences, we're all concerned about the environmental threats that our people face. We've got to be able to work together on the areas of shared interest while simultaneously pursuing resolution on the areas where we have a difference. On the Green New Deal, there are some things I agree with in there. There are some things I disagree with in there. I think the overall objectives that are laid out about protecting our environment, obviously I agree with. I do not believe in investing in more of our money in the expensive and outdated technology of nuclear power as we know it, that generates so much waste that's creating a threat, not just for us, but for 500,000 years. I visited San Onofre in California, which is one of many communities that is stuck with hosting and holding on to this nuclear waste that at any day, if there's an earthquake or if there's some other situation, could destroy that entire community. I also don't, which the Green New Deal allows for nuclear power, and it also allows for fracking, which I don't support. Sorry, second question, role of education in having a more informed discussion and dialogue, incredibly important. And this kind of goes back to my opening remarks just about how critical it is that we not be afraid of open discussion, whether it's in the classroom or the living room or, you know, at the coffee shop, being able to have a dialogue about different perspectives on different issues without being afraid of being called names or being canceled or deleted or whatever it is, I think is incredibly, incredibly important. Because who are we as America if we're afraid to speak up and exercise our First Amendment rights? That undermines the whole basis of really what our country has been founded upon. And so it's not only something that we have to encourage, and I think educational institutions play a really, really important role in that, where as you're going and you know, maybe you're learning new things, you're stepping outside of your home for the first time, and you're able to have this open dialogue without being afraid. Not only should it be encouraged, I think it's something that we all should really take a stand for. Take a stand for the First Amendment, whether it's online or at school. It's something that can easily be eroded, and it's something that we have to not be complacent around and must stand up to protect.
We have time for just one more question.
My name is Christopher. First and foremost, I want to thank you for your principled stand against regime change wars and endless wars. I myself fought in Syria in 2017 with Kurdish forces against ISIS. Wow. And I want to thank you for also the legislation that you introduced, the Terrorism Act, stop funding Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra, and to really standing up to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and all the Wahhabi Salafi jihadists. My question is, if you as a legislator and as president would stop the arming, funding, and supplying of Ukrainian neo-Nazis like the Azov Battalion and Right Sector, who are participating in the Ukrainian armed forces in their war against the people of Donetsk and Lugansk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Throughout my time in Congress, I've supported providing defensive assistance to those in Ukraine as they are continuing on through that conflict. I think as we look to I think we've got to step back a little bit and look at what's happening across the region. You know, we've got to look to see why we are in the place that we're in now. More and more countries, and this goes to the escalation of tensions between the US and Russia that I started talking about, that nuclear strategists are saying is pushing us closer to the brink of nuclear catastrophe, which really is the existential threat that faces us, not only here, but that faces us in the world. And unless we start to take action to begin to de-escalate these tensions, working with partners across Europe, also negotiating and beginning to restart talks with Russia, then we're not going to be able to get to where we need to be able to start to put together these treaties that have been torn up, both the INF treaty that Trump threw in the trash can that Reagan and Gorbachev negotiated, but also the New START treaty that's due to expire, in February of 2021, shortly after the next president takes office. And this administration has taken no action, given no indication at all that they are going to do what's necessary to renew that important treaty. I think there's some very, very serious issues at stake here. And our current state of politics is playing politics with our future rather than doing what is necessary to address this existential threat of nuclear catastrophe that we face. This is something that's near and dear to my heart because of the nuclear wake-up call that we had in Hawaii in 2018. When we had, early on a Saturday morning, there was our civil defense put out an alert across over 1 million cell phones, the TV and the radio saying, "Missile incoming, seek immediate shelter, this is not a drill." First of all, who does nuclear drills these days? Nobody. 1950s, right? So when we all saw this message, "Missile incoming, seek immediate shelter, this is not a drill," if you can imagine how terrifying that was. Thinking, okay, there's just 15 minutes to live. And people immediately thinking, I was not in Hawaii at the time, I was in DC, my parents are there, and I'm thinking immediately, where are they gonna go? I figured, okay, Saturday morning, they're probably at home, 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, where are they gonna go? Where is their shelter? There's none. College kids sprinting across the University of Hawaii campus, trying to find what building would provide them shelter. Had a father who lowered his little girl, Anya's age, down a manhole, thinking that that may be the only place that she might be kept safe. You can stop here and think, or raise your hand. How many of you would know exactly where you would go if we got that message here tonight? This is the reality of how our leaders have failed us. Have failed us because not only are we in this place where we are at great risk of nuclear catastrophe with ever-escalating tensions, a new nuclear arms race, nuclear weapons being made smaller and quote-unquote more tactical and therefore more easy to use, therefore more easily starting a nuclear war. But you have these fancy alert systems that say, okay, there's a missile incoming, seek immediate shelter, but there is no shelter. There's nowhere to go. As president, within my first week in office, I will have a summit with Russia and China, call for a summit to begin these talks necessary to start to de-escalate tensions, to be able to talk, to work out those areas of difference, to be able to see where there are areas of shared and common interest, and to begin to make the kinds of progress made by leaders who have come before us, whether it's JFK's meeting and talks with Khrushchev, or Reagan's talks with Gorbachev that resulted in the INF treaty. This is the action that must be taken so that we as a country can begin to back off from the brink of nuclear catastrophe and make it so that no one No one has to live in fear that what happened to us will happen to you.
My name is Aria, and I have two questions. My first question is, was the military scary? And my second question is, what was your household like?
My household growing up?
Yes.
Okay. Can I ask you a question first? Do you have brothers and sisters?
Yes.
How many do you have? One brother? Is he older or younger? Okay, so you're the big sister. Oh, he's taking a snooze. Thank you, Arya, for your question. I grew up as the fourth of 5 kids in Hawaii. I have 3 older brothers and a younger sister. And I would say we grew up in a pretty strict household. My parents ran a very tight ship. We were taught the value of hard work from a very young age. 3 older brothers and us, my sister and I, we were all pretty rambunctious. And one of the earliest lessons that we learned was you break it, you buy it. So if we're playing and roughhousing a little bit too much and something broke or whatever, my parents would tell my brothers, okay, your next paper route check, you're buying a new window because you broke it. We grew up working in the family restaurant. My parents had a deli. They're teachers by trade and training, and that's where they started out, but entrepreneurs at heart. So my first job, how old are you? You're 10. So I was about your age when I was wiping tables and sweeping floors in the family restaurant, and that was my first paycheck. I got paid $6 every 2 weeks. Talk about minimum wage, come on. $6 every 2 weeks. But I'm really grateful for the fact that I was able to grow up in a family full of love and in a beautiful place in Hawaii with a culture of aloha that inspired connectedness, even with all of the diversity that we have in our state. We're the most diverse state in the country. I experienced from a very young age that I was happiest when I was doing things for other people, serving others, trying to have a positive impact on those around me, being of service to God and being of service to others. I knew that that was what I wanted to do with my life. That desire to serve is what has and continues to motivate me. There were a lot of challenges in the military. Things that I didn't think that I would be able to do until I actually did them, beginning with my basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I didn't come from, any kind of, my dad wasn't, my parents weren't in the military, my grandparents were. But I'm a pretty competitive person, and so stayed focused on what I was doing, and usually what I told myself as I was about to go through an obstacle course or do something that I wasn't sure I'd be able to do, or maybe I was scared I was gonna fall or whatever, just said, you know what, it's not gonna kill me. I'll survive, I'll be okay. And was able to break through barriers and see what more I could do that I didn't think I could before. Being deployed to Iraq, being deployed to a war zone was a life-changing experience. And one of the first things that I saw in our camp, about 40 miles north of Baghdad, there was a big sign at one of the gates in the camp that read, "Is today the day?" I don't know who put that sign up, but we saw it almost every day. Is today the day? And it was a reminder every single day to every one of us that any day could be our last. That our time could come when my life would be over. And I worked in a medical unit where we experienced every day that terribly high human cost. Friends of ours who one day we would be laughing with and making jokes with, and the next day They weren't there. They were gone. So at a deeply personal level for me, it caused me to think about, what am I doing with my life? How can I make the most of the time that I have? How can I best be of service? And to find shelter and to find strength in my own personal relationship with God, and knowing that whatever happened to me, that I would be okay. Thank you for your question. Yeah, someone will come with a microphone. Right here.
Hi. Thank you for engaging with us in
What's your name?
conversation. My name is Jada.
Thank you, Jada.
Yeah, thank you for engaging with us in conversation. My question is about 2014. There was an event where you were the keynote speaker. That was at an event that was celebrating the election of Narendra Modi. And that event was put on by his political party's lobby group, the Overseas Friends of the BJP. At this event, the Foreign Affairs Cell Chief called your re-election a foregone conclusion. At this event, you wore a BJP scarf. You wore a BJP scarf at this event, and campaign finance records show that you used campaign money to help pay for this foreign political party's event. So my question is, why would you allow or possibly even collaborate this type of foreign interference in your election to Congress?
Thank you for your question. Some of the things that you were citing are not true. My campaign finance records will show that I've complied with all campaign finance laws and have not helped to fund any foreign countries' political ventures anywhere. That's a fact. I'm not sure where you're reading it, but that's a fact. Look, I get invited to a lot of different events. I have support from people across this country, including Indian Americans. And sometimes, as we're standing, and we will at the end of this event here, when people come up and they want to take a picture, and somebody put something around my neck and snapped a picture without my really knowing what it was. I didn't know what it was. That's the reality that's what happened in the picture that you showed. Look, I'm a Democrat. I'm an American citizen. I'm running for president. I've served in Congress for 7 years, served in our military for almost 17 years. And I was co-chair of the U.S.-India caucus for 2 years because I, like President Obama and Nancy Pelosi and so many other leaders across party lines, understand the importance of the U.S.-India relationship for an economic perspective, from a security perspective, from a cultural and educational perspective. As we look to what's happening across the Asia Pacific, I have and continue to work to strengthen those partnerships. Any implication or accusation or efforts to elicit some kind of suspicion about me or my motives can only be attributed to religious bigotry because I'm a practicing Hindu. That's the one thing that's different about me and President Obama, who worked very closely with Prime Minister Narendra Modi throughout his time in office. President Obama is not Hindu. I am. So the attacks that political opponents are trying to use against me and trying to create something that does not exist can only be attributed to religious bigotry and trying to create suspicion from people that maybe I'm someone that I'm not. I'm very transparent about who I am, my own personal beliefs, and my political positions on different issues. And I encourage people, whether it's political, whether it's religious bigoted attacks towards me or against others, that we as a country, we stand up against that bigotry. That's not who we are. Behind you, Kareem.
My name is Madeline. I'm a student here as well. And I'm a young voter, so I really want to do my research. It's my first time, voting in the election. And I really think you told a very compelling, story about the importance of service and representing the people that elected you. They are, public servants in that they serve the public.
Yeah.
And I think that a metric that I really want to look into is the voting records of people in their district, how they voted and how often they showed up. So I've looked into your voting record, and I saw that since October in 2019, you missed more than 80% of the votes that were called, roll call votes. It was close to 86. And for context, the median in the House was 2%. So I'm curious how you would explain that and how voters can trust you to represent them on a national scale.
Sure.
For a much wider, array of things to be present for those people who are going to put their trust into
Absolutely.
the office of the president.
Absolutely. Can I ask you if what in your research have you found the attendance records to be for all of the other candidates running for president since October has been?
Since October, yours was the highest of missed votes. It was in the 99th percentile compared to the rest of the House. And like I said, the median.
I'm just talking about the people running for president, though.
In the House and the Senate, it's
Yeah.
different. I don't know what it is in the Senate, but
Yeah.
again, like
The only reason I
it's the
ask,
highest.
because I've seen what you're citing here, and I think context is really important. That some political opposition have chosen to take a snapshot in time that doesn't actually represent the full picture. And if you look at all of the candidates, there's a number of members of Congress. I'm the only one left from the House, but there were a few others from the House who were running for president, have since dropped out. There are a number of senators, some who've dropped out, some who are still running for president. And as you all are looking at our records and attendance in Congress, I think it's important to look at it in context of what has that record been since we started running for president. And if you look at that record, I believe I am second to the lowest in numbers of missed votes as compared to all of the senators and all of the other House members who are running for president. Look, I'm running for president. I'm still actively engaged in doing my job in Congress and representing my constituents. But I'm running for president to bring about the serious change that we need to see in this country. And I am continuing to be able to serve both my constituents in Hawaii and our country through that process. Say yes, sir.
Hi, Tulsi. My name is Newt.
Hi, Newt.
I was just wondering, what's the water like down in Hampton Beach this time of year?
Are you a surfer, Newt?
I'm not, but I saw a video of you and a gentleman the other day getting wet in the ocean, and
Yeah.
it was quite touching, and I think it really was emblematic of the sort of authentic human connection that I think is fundamental to your campaign.
Thank you.
And so I was just bringing that up for you.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I am grateful to have been invited by some of the local surfers in Hampton to go surfing with them. They asked, like, after Thanksgiving, some of them were out surfing during that snowstorm that happened, if you remember. I was very shocked, and they said, well, hey, if you're ever in the neighborhood again and there's waves, we'd love to have you come surf with us. And I wasn't sure it was going to happen, but New Year's Day, or New Year's Eve, I think it was, we bumped into someone who owns Cinnamon Rainbows, the surf shop in Hampton, and he said, there's going to be waves. Do you want to come? It worked out, and we were able to ring in the new year with a whole bunch of surfers there in Hampton. Had a 5 mil wetsuit. Thankfully, it worked, and it kept me warm. I have never, it's like 32 degrees in the water, and going underneath, like duck diving under a wave, took on a whole new experience with that shock of thinking my face was going to fall off for a few seconds. But mentally, I was somewhat prepared for this because the day before, on New Year's Eve, I was able to join a guy named Chucky Rosa, who has 6 kids, and he and his wife, Mary, sadly lost their 2 oldest boys to the opioid crisis. Both of them died of accidental overdose 1 year after the other. And since their deaths, Chucky has gone out into the ocean down the street from their house where they spread their son's ashes every morning for a dip in the ocean, every single day of the year, no matter the weather, no matter how cold it is, with no wetsuit. He goes in just with his shorts. And I had met him at a town hall that we had in Hampton about a month before, and he said, hey, if you're ever in town, if you want to come with me and jump in the ocean one morning, come, you're welcome. And so New Year's Eve, we took him up on it, and I feel really, really humbled and honored to have been able to hold his hand as we went in and plunged in the ocean. It was windy, it was cold, it was rainy, but to bring attention to the loss that he and his family have gone through, and so many families across New Hampshire and across the country have gone through, was a real honor. And I'm inspired by how he and his family, even after having gone through such incredible loss and grief, now spend their time going and talking to kids in schools and working on prevention and information and raising awareness to try to do their part in ending this terrible epidemic.
Last question. Are we out of time?
Yeah, we'll grab you in the back there. Last question.
Hi, Tulsi. My name's Ryan. I'm from Minnesota. My question is, in one of the last debates, you had undergone criticism for your conversations with Syrian President Assad. And similarly, Donald Trump has received criticism for his sitting down and talking with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. So I'm wondering if you share personally those criticisms of Trump, and in your presidency, would you sit down with leaders like Kim Jong-un or Assad or Putin? Thank you.
Yes, I would. Thanks for your question. Diplomacy. That is literally the definition of diplomacy. And for those who lack the courage or the willingness to sit down across the table from a dictator or a regime or even an adversary, are doing a disservice to our country and our people, because the only alternative to diplomacy is war. We are unfortunately hearing a lot of these criticisms in our political culture today. Look, I publicly said Trump made the right decision in meeting with Kim Jong-un. Diplomacy is always the better choice. Now, there are a number of other issues with Trump's foreign policy that have undermined his diplomatic efforts in North Korea. That's a whole other conversation. But actually just going and beginning that conversation, I think, is always really important. We unfortunately have moved, at least the political dialogue in Washington has moved so far away from where we need to be, where now, I'm being criticized, others are being criticized for exercising diplomacy, when back in 2008, when then candidate Obama said that he would meet with the leader of Syria, the leader of Russia, the leader of North Korea, and he mentioned a number of other different countries in the pursuit of peace. And he was lauded for saying that, rightly so, rightly so. I think it's dangerous that we are in a place now where our media culture and political culture are openly and roundly criticizing diplomacy. This is one of the reasons why we find ourselves in a perpetual state of ongoing regime change wars. That is what I will end. I will always choose diplomacy first, recognizing that war must always be the last resort and only used in the service and the interests of our country and our national security. Thanks for your question. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for your time here tonight. I hope you have found this discussion and conversation to be helpful and informative to you. We are headed very quickly towards Election Day on February 11th. I want to invite one of our incredible volunteers up here to share just a few words about what we're doing here in New Hampshire and how you'll be able to help.
Thank you all for coming again. What I have here